Back when I was 10 years old, my family decided to take a visit to my hometown of Ecuador. We went for the summer and planned out our whole stay. One day, my mom and dad were getting ready to go to a wedding, and I was in the house with them. My big sister went over to a friend's house, and my other relatives had already left for the wedding. I was supposed to stay at home alone for the time being, but I saw that it was a beautiful day out and decided to ask my mom and dad to go to a park that was no more than 2 blocks away. They were reluctant at first, stating that there would be nobody to take care of me, but I argued that it was a beautiful day out and there was no way that the park would be empty. They kept getting dressed as I kept on arguing until they finally gave in. They said that I could go to the park as long as I was back before dark. I agreed and ran outside to head for the new park. It took me no more than 10 minutes to get there, and I was ready to make new friends and play around. But oddly enough, there was nobody else in the park. It looked abandoned, which was weird seeing how this is one of the 2 parks in the whole city. It should have been packed, but I paid no mind to it. I ran over to a swing set and played around. As I played, I suddenly heard a voice from the distance. A clown was on the other side of the gate and motioning for me to get closer. Behind him was a white van, which I had noticed before but just thought it was a delivery truck of sorts. I slowly started walking towards the clown and stopped a good distance away from him. He asked me, "Hey kid, do you like clowns?" I nodded no to him and he gave me that clown frown and then said, "Well then let me see if I can change that." He opened up his car, and by looking inside I saw there were no seats, no posters, just 2 boxes and then complete emptiness. Being a child, I still paid no mind to it and watched as he pulled out a deflated balloon. He wrapped his lips around the end of it and blew till the balloon was fully inflated. He tied the end and started to form the balloon into a balloon dog. He showed it to me and I smiled. He then motioned for me to get closer, to which I complied. He handed the balloon to me and said, "Do you like it?" I nodded yes this time, and he gave me a little smile. He then grinned in the creepiest way possible. The grin was so creepy that even as a kid, I knew to back away a bit. The clown then said that if I wanted to see the rest of his tricks, I would have to get into the truck. I told him that an exit was on the other side of the park, and I wouldn't be able to climb the small gate. He then said the few words that haunt me to this day. "Get a little closer and I'll carry you over. Then we can have loads of fun in my truck. Come on, kid." While saying this, he still had that creepy grin plastered across his face. I merely backed away and told him, "No, it's okay, sir." His grin turned into anger, as though he was annoyed at this. He placed his hands on his hips and said to me, "Aw, but we were going to have so much fun." Right when he said that, I heard a voice on the other side of the park yelling, "Son, son, I'm here to pick you up." I turned and saw a man that I recognized as a local neighbor. He was not my real father, obviously, but the little me knew to run over to him. I said nothing to the clown, I just ran to the man and gave him a hug. The man waved to the clown and said, "Thanks for keeping my kid entertained," to which the clown replied, "No problem." As we turned around, I was able to hear this man murmur, "Sick monster." I looked at him and asked, "Sir, what exactly is going on?" He gave a sigh and explained everything. As it turns out, that was not a real clown. He was a man that had been kidnapping kids across all of Ecuador. He would lure kids with the clown costume and take them away to God knows what place. The people of my town had a feeling he was coming to our town next, which was why the whole park was deserted. He said that he was walking by when he noticed that I was talking to the clown and ran over to save me. We had finally arrived at my house and the man said, "Be careful with who you talk to, son. Not everyone is who they seem." I gave him one final hug and gave him a thanks for saving me from the sick clown. He gave me a rub on the head and said, "It's okay, my boy. Now hurry on. I have my own things to worry about." I nodded and ran into the house. Nobody was there, and by the time they had returned, I decided not to tell anyone since I knew they'd flip out. I'm not quite sure what happened to that sicko, but hopefully he is now behind bars. Hopefully. It still sickens me to this day what could have become of me without the man that saved me. I worked at a pet store in Wisconsin in 1998, and I was 16 at the time. The boss had assigned me to the fish section of the store. One day, an old man came in and he really gave me the creeps. He had a glass eye and his skin looked all waxy. He smelled funny too, like putrid meat. He asked me which fish I liked the most. I told him I liked a particular goldfish. I left for a moment to speak to some other customers. They weren't buying any fish, just looking, but I wanted to get away from that weirdo. Suddenly, the woman I was talking to slapped her mouth and pointed behind me. I turned and saw the weird old man with the glass eye reaching into the tank chasing the little goldfish. He caught one by the tail and brought it up and shoved it into his mouth. He chewed on it and slime dripped out over his lips and onto his chin. He was simply staring at me while chewing. I was in complete shock. The manager and a man called Bill, who worked on the bird section, came running in. They soon managed to chase the man out of the store. I quickly ran to the phone in the staff room and called the cops. When the cops got there, the man was long gone. He was back again a few weeks later, despite being banned. However, he wasn't in my section this time. I suddenly heard the birds going crazy and found the weird old man in their cage, trying to grab one of the birds. He soon caught a small green parrot and proceeded to squeeze it until its head flopped down limp. The man with the glass eye shoved the parrot's head into his mouth and bit the head off. I saw the blood and I ran out of the shop crying. During this period, I remember phoning in sick a lot because I was so freaked out. One day, Bill told me the man had been caught by the police and was cautioned to stay away from the store. I went back to work, and everything went back to normal for at least some time. A few months later, the man with the glass eye was back, only this time he was over in the small mammal section. My work colleague and good friend Jess started screaming, "Call the police! Call the police!" out of nowhere. I hurriedly ran over. I found the old man standing in the rabbit cage and he was tearing open a rabbit's throat with his bare teeth and hands. There was blood all over the man's mouth. When he saw me, he pointed and screamed something in a weird language. It scared the hell out of me. He threw the rabbit at Jess and ran right at me. He was growling like a zombie. He had a look in his face like he wanted to bite into my throat. Luckily, Bill and the customer wrestled and pinned the old man down on the floor. The cops arrested him this time. I was naturally freaked out for months. Turns out the man with the glass eye was sectioned under the Mental Health Act, and still, to my knowledge, locked up there to this day. One day, when I was 15, I was walking home from school as I usually do because my parents don't often come to pick me up due to their busy work schedules. The place I walk through isn't the best part of town, but it's certainly not bad either. It's kind of old and run down, but I don't normally run into any goofballs. At least not until that day, that is. As I was walking by the area, I thought I heard somebody whisper something. I kept turning around and to find the source, but I didn't see anything. I kept hearing somebody say something though, so I stopped for a moment and said hello. I then heard somebody say hello back. This time, however, it was louder. I looked into one of the alleys, and there was a stranger there. He was smiling with a strange grin that I can't quite describe. Think of the Joker from Batman. I guess that's as closest to describing it as I can. He was just sitting there, on the ground, with his face turned in my direction with this weird grin. I started wondering how he knew somebody was there. I thought maybe he was just crazy and was talking to himself. The man looked homeless. He was pretty thin and looked extremely dirty. His hair was cut short though. He was wearing a trench coat, and that's it from what I saw. No pants or anything. He then asked me for some change. I told him no, as I didn't have any change with me, and I don't like giving change to the homeless. The man kept his smile, however, and told me thank you for the time. The weird thing was, he thanked me by my name. I've never met this man before in my life. That instantly freaked me out. After saying my name, he looked to the sky and kept smiling. I didn't have my name on my bag or anything. I didn't really want to find out how he knew me, so without saying anything, I quickly walked away. The man must have went through somewhere though, because as soon as I turned the corner, he was standing on the sidewalk in front of me. It was probably a bad idea turning down a street that the alley led into. I probably should have just taken the long way home, but I was frightened and wasn't really thinking that he might come follow me. He once again had that Joker grin on his face. He told me something along the lines of, "Hey, you're a nice looking boy. Do you want to play with me?" As he asked this, he started scratching his crotch. I didn't want to fucking play with this guy. I then saw the tip of his crotch pop out of his trench coat as he was itching it. The entire time he had that weird smile. I realized that he had to have known his crotch was hanging out, but I think he wanted me to see it. However, I didn't want to see any more of it. I was disgusted. I told him to go back to the alley, but the man shook his head and started walking towards me in a very strange manner. I can't quite describe it, but it was extremely inhuman. I'm not saying he's alien, it just wasn't quite anything I've ever seen before. Perhaps he had some sort of disorder. The man then stopped about a foot away from me. I don't know why I didn't run. I guess I was too terrified and or disgusted to. He then looked up to the sky and thanked God for his opportunities in life for some reason. The entire time he had this huge Joker-like grin on his face. It still terrifies me to this day, and I remember it so distinctly. He looked back at me and asked, "Are you ready to play with me, child of God?" I got so freaked out, I fucking ran away that time. I should have ran away before. I could have sworn I heard him talking about God as I ran away, but I wasn't really paying attention. I just wanted to get home. I've never even told my parents this story. I don't want them to worry about it. It's been 2 years and I haven't seen this guy since, and I still walk the same way every day for some reason. Perhaps he was playing a prank, or he was just really mentally disturbed. Either way, I hope nobody has to face this weird guy again. This happened to me back in 2007. I was 9 years old and my brother was 14. My mom had sent us out of the house with about $30 to go watch a movie and maybe get a bite to eat afterwards. After watching the movie, it was getting pretty dark and I was ready to go home. But my brother wanted to get something to eat first, and we agreed to walk to McDonald's, which was only a couple of blocks from the movie theater. On our way there, we were stopped and approached by a man. He had a friendly smile plastered on his face, and he was holding his child's hand. There didn't seem to be anything off about this man. He was average looking and seemed to be nothing more than a father having a day out with his son. "Hey, do you two think you could give my son and I a hand real quick?" he asked. "We need help loading a mattress onto the back of our truck. The truck is just up the road." "Sorry, but we don't really have time," my brother said. It was at this time that I noticed the little boy. He was about 8 years old and he looked abnormally thin. He had a blank expression on his face and wore clothes that were much too big for him. I turned my attention back to the man, who was now mumbling to my brother about how it would only take a second. My brother kindly declined again. Being the helpful kid that I was, I joined in with the man and tried to persuade my brother that we should help them out. I turned to my brother, who was now staring down at the little boy. My brother had a disturbed expression on his face as he looked down at the child. The child stared back at my brother blankly. I didn't understand why my brother had that look on his face. He grabbed my hand and said, "I think that's my mom over there." He pulled me and we began walking away from the man. I didn't understand what was going on and why my brother had just lied about her mom being there. He didn't let go of my hand and practically dragged me until we were a far distance away from the man and his son. I looked back and could still see the man, only now he wasn't smiling anymore. He had a look of fury on his face and he yanked the little boy by the arm and they walked away. I pulled away from my brother's grasp and bombarded him with questions. He shushed me and pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. He dialed in a number and began pacing around nervously while talking on the phone. I remember the police showing up and my mom came soon after. She took me home, but my brother was left with the police. I asked my mother what was going on and she said that the police were just questioning my brother because the man we had encountered was dangerous. That's all she told me, and I went to bed. By the next morning I had almost completely forgotten about the incident and things went back to normal. One day I decided to call my now 22-year-old brother to get some answers. When I brought the ordeal back up, he finally gave me the information I wanted to know. And now that I know everything, I understand how fucking terrifying our encounter with the man truly was. My brother told me that while the man was constantly trying to convince us to come with him, he happened to look down at the little boy. The little boy then looked at my brother with his eyes filled with terror and mouthed the words, "I'm not his son. Please help me." Then his expression went back to being completely blank, almost as if he had never said anything at all. This was why he had become so freaked out and snatched me away. When he called the police, they hurried down and he described the man the best he could. He couldn't do much with the little information my brother had given because we hadn't even seen the car the man was supposedly had. My brother told me that a few weeks into the investigation they had found the little boy who was with the man dead. His body had been cruelly dumped in the woods. The cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration. If my brother and I had gone with the sicko, we likely would have met the same fate. He obviously couldn't have kidnapped both of us on his own, as my brother was a fairly strong fellow. That meant he had other pedophile partners who would help him snatch up unsuspecting kids. Unfortunately, they were never able to catch any of the sick fucks who did this to the child, but the man was definitely not his father. His real parents had already been searching for their missing son for almost a month. Every time I think about the boy, I feel a deep pity for him. He was only a year younger than I was at the time, and I can only imagine how terrible it must have been to slowly starve to death. Back in 2007, in New Zealand, my single mother and I moved into a new house. It was a small house, but it had a huge backyard with huge trees in it. My mother and I were feeling lonely, so we decided to buy a dog. Once we got one, we decided to go to doggy clubs and dog parks so our little fluff ball could socialize with other small puppies. At one of our clubs, my mother met this middle-aged man who owned 2 little spoodles. He said he was a dog breeder and he liked to keep rare breeds for himself occasionally. My mother and I got to like the man, so he invited us to his house. This is where things started to get creepy. He had a large shed out in his yard where he kept his breeding dogs. He took us inside and I noticed all of the dogs reeked of semen and had small scars behind their ears. I decided to put this down to the nature of his work. My mother sat down in the living room and the man asked me to fetch a soda from the gray fridge in his garage. When I opened the door, I saw poisonous chemicals littered across the shelves. Cyanide, pesticides, you name it. Anything you can legally buy was in there. I panicked a little and looked for the gray fridge to grab my drink and get out of there. I told my mother about this once we left, but she put it down to an overactive, albeit gory imagination. She told me that she invited him over for dinner in 3 days' time, as it was a holiday important to his culture. He came over and acted quite normally. He had dinner, then left. But then at the next dog club meeting, he wasn't there. And the next, and so on. 2 months later, we found dead animal bits around our house. We thought it was weird, but we ignored it until my dog ate a piece and got violently sick. We took her to the vet and had her stomach pumped. The vet told us that the dead animal flesh was laced with pesticides and dangerous chemicals. We were told not to let our dog out. 2 days later, I went out to grab the lawnmower and we find a dead dog with its head missing and strung by the legs from one of our trees. I tell my mother and the police start an investigation, but they find nothing. Several days pass and my mom, who is gardening, finds dead dogs, cats, and canaries hung and littered around the same tree that the last dog was hung from. Oddly enough, no blood. My mother immediately calls the police and they arrive and decide to put a 24/7 watch on our house. A couple days later, they catch the culprit, and it's none other than the guy that my mother invited. It turns out he's a zoophile who has broken into people's houses, killed, raped, and ate pets alive. He has been on the run for over 12 years in New Zealand, and is notorious for poisoning pieces of meat and leaving them at dog-heavy areas, such as dog parks, vet clinics, and dog schools. He was charged on over 100 cases of breaking in and entering, stalking, animal abuse, rape, trespassing, robbery, possession of illegal chemicals, vandalism, and possession of a firearm. He got up to 80 years in jail, but ended up raping and killing a fellow inmate, and later he killed himself after receiving life in maximum security.